Rosie, please don't lick the window, Sawyer Nelson groaned from the front seat, glancing in the rearview mirror at his 5-year-old daughter who had her tongue pressed to the fogged glass of his old truck. Rain pounded the windshield like 1,000 tiny fists, turning the backroads of Ridge Creek into a river. The headlights barely cut through the downpour. But it tastes like sky, she giggled, her curls bouncing as she grinned at him. Sawyer shook his head, amused despite the chaos. Sky doesn't taste like anything, Munchkin. It tastes like wet. That made him laugh, even as his fingers tightened around the steering wheel. The truck sputtered as they climbed the hill, and he cursed under his breath. Come on, don't die on me now. Just as he said it, the engine coughed, gave a final wheeze, and died completely. No, 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 Sawyer pulled over to the shoulder, though the road barely had one. The storm outside was relentless, wind howling like it had a grudge. He glanced at Rosie, who was now watching him with wide eyes. Is it broken? Yeah, sweetheart, he said, grabbing his raincoat from the back. But don't worry, we'll sit tight. I'll figure something out. But before he could even reach for his phone, a flash of lightning illuminated the road ahead, and then he saw her. A woman, standing outside her car, soaked to the bone, her arms wrapped around herself. Her long dress clung to her body, and her hair was plastered to her face. She looked completely lost. Stay here, Sawyer said quickly, pulling his coat on. Lock the doors, okay, Daddy? I'll be right back, I promise. He stepped out into the storm, shielding his face with one arm as the rain slapped against him. Hey, he called, running toward her. Ma'am, are you okay? The woman turned, startled. She was shivering badly, her lips blue. My car, it just stopped. This storm came out of nowhere. I can't get a signal. Yeah, same here. Roads flood fast out here. Come on, my truck's not working either, but at least it's dry. She hesitated, blinking rain from her lashes. Are you sure? Positive. You'll freeze out here. She didn't argue. He guided her to the truck, opening the door for her before sliding in behind her. Rosie sat up straighter when she saw the stranger. Hi, the little girl said shyly. Hi, the woman replied, her voice soft. I'm Mabel. Mabel Zane. Sawyer reached behind the seat and handed her a dry flannel shirt. Sawyer, that's Rosie. Here, this should help. She took the shirt with trembling hands. Thank you. I was driving back to the city after visiting a friend in the countryside. I didn't think the storm would be this bad. Sawyer glanced at her. She didn't look like someone used to being stranded. Her dress was expensive, her nails manicured, and even soaking wet she had this polished, untouchable look. Still, he offered a gentle smile. Well, Ridge Creek has a way of humbling you. She gave a soft laugh and pulled the flannel around herself. Apparently. They sat in silence for a moment, the storm rattling the truck around them. Rosie reached forward and touched Mabel's hand. You smell like flowers, she said. Mabel smiled. Thank you, that's nice of you to say. Sawyer watched the interaction with quiet interest. Mabel didn't seem annoyed or uncomfortable. In fact, she looked grateful. I'm sorry about the truck, he said. I was trying to get Rosie home before it got worse, but... You live nearby, about 10 minutes out, but with this storm it might as well be an hour. We'll be okay, Mabel said, her voice low, almost as if she was reassuring herself more than him. I've got some snacks in the glove box, Sawyer offered. Not fancy, but better than starving, Mabel chuckled. I'll take anything at this point. As Rosie giggled and reached for the crackers, Mabel looked at Sawyer again. Really looked at him this time. His jaw was rough with stubble, his eyes tired but kind. There was a quiet steadiness to him that made her feel safe, something she wasn't used to feeling, especially not lately. Sawyer noticed her gaze and cleared his throat. You warm enough, she nodded. Yeah, thanks again, Sawyer. Not many people would stop. I've got a daughter, he said simply. I'd want someone to help her if she was stuck in a storm. That hit her harder than she expected. She hadn't thought about her dad in years. He died when she was 16, right before she took over the family company with her mother. Since then, life had been suits, boardrooms, and expectations. No one ever stopped for her, not unless they wanted something. But Sawyer didn't even know who she was, and that was oddly comforting. The storm didn't let up for another hour. They passed the time sharing crackers, telling Rosie silly stories, and listening to her sing off-key. Mabel even joined in once or twice, surprising herself. When the rain eased a little, Sawyer decided to make a run for it. We're not far. If we take it slow, we can walk it. I'll carry Rosie. Mabel hesitated. Are you sure? I'd rather not sleep in this tin can. Besides, my place has a fireplace. The walk was muddy and cold, but Mabel didn't complain. She followed Sawyer as he carried Rosie wrapped in his coat. When they reached his small cabin tucked into the woods, he unlocked the door and gestured her inside. It was humble. Worn hardwood floors, a faded couch, and a fireplace that crackled with warmth once he got it going. But it was clean, cozy, and full of life. Rosie immediately curled up on a blanket near the fire. Sawyer handed Mabel a towel and a pair of old sweatpants. They'll be huge, but dry, he said, turning to give her privacy. Mabel changed quickly and returned to find him in the kitchen, making grilled cheese. You're really going all out, she teased. Hey, he said with a grin, don't knock it till you try it. They sat on the floor next to Rosie, who had already fallen asleep. Mabel took a bite and groaned. Okay, this is actually amazing. See, he said, nudging her shoulder lightly. Told you, she laughed, and the sound surprised both of them. It had been so long since she laughed like that without restraint, without guarding herself. Why do I feel like I've known you longer than 2 hours? She asked, almost to herself. He looked at her, something unreadable in his eyes. Maybe because sometimes the right people show up exactly when you need them. Mabel swallowed hard, suddenly aware of how close they were sitting. She could feel the warmth of his body, the scent of rain and wood smoke clinging to him. It wasn't like her world, her cold office, her glossy penthouse, her empty champagne toasts. This was real, and she didn't want to leave, but she couldn't tell him who she was. Not yet. Because the second he found out she was the CEO of Zane, Tech, the woman who ran billion-dollar meetings in heels and power suits, he'd look at her differently. Right now, he saw her as a woman lost in a storm, and for the first time in years, that was enough. The next morning broke with a pale light that spilled through the curtainless windows, filtering through the trees outside. Mabel woke on the couch, tangled in a wool throw, blinking against the unfamiliar ceiling. The scent of coffee drifted through the air, mingling with the faint, comforting aroma of pine and ash. She sat up slowly, the oversized sweatshirt slipping off one shoulder. Her body ached from the stiff couch, but it was the quiet that disoriented her the most. There were no car horns, no hum of traffic, no buzzing phone on the nightstand. Just birdsong and the low murmur of voices coming from the adjoining room. She padded toward the kitchen, bare feet light on the floor. Rosie sat at the table, drawing something with intense concentration, her brow furrowed. Sawyer stood by the stove, wearing jeans and a dark Henley, sleeves pushed to his elbows. He was flipping pancakes with a casual ease that made it look like ritual instead of necessity. You're up, he said, glancing over his shoulder. Hope you slept all right. I did, she said, voice still husky with sleep. It's been a long time since I woke up without an alarm blaring. Rosie looked up from her drawing. I made you a picture. Mabel stepped closer and bent to look. It was a crayon sketch of a stick figure with long hair standing under a rainbow. Next to her was a smaller figure with curls and a tall one holding an umbrella over both of them. That's you, Rosie explained, pointing. And that's me, and Daddy's keeping us dry. Mabel swallowed hard. It's beautiful, thank you. Sawyer placed a plate of pancakes in front of her. Hope you like maple syrup. I didn't have much else. Mabel sat down slowly. You didn't have to, I wanted to, he said, cutting her off gently. She watched him sit across from her, pouring syrup over his own stack like this was normal. Like she hadn't crashed into his world unannounced. Like she belonged here. She took a bite. It was imperfect, slightly overcooked on one side, but warm, comforting, real. She hadn't sat down for breakfast with someone who cooked it for her in years, if ever. I'll try to call a tow truck once I get a signal, she said after a moment. Do you know if the roads are clear? They're probably still slick, he replied. We can check the county updates, but it might be better to wait a few hours. Mabel nodded, unsure whether she was disappointed or relieved. Rosie looked between them. Can Mabel stay until lunch? I think she needs to get her car looked at, Sawyer said carefully. But maybe I could stay a little longer, Mabel offered, surprising herself. Sawyer raised an eyebrow but said nothing. Later, while Rosie played outside in her rain boots, Mabel leaned against the porch railing, watching the mist rise off the trees. Sawyer stepped beside her, his coffee steaming in the morning air. "You seem more relaxed now," he said. "Because I am," she admitted. "I didn't realize how much until I stopped moving." He took a sip. "What is it you do anyway?" She hesitated. "Consulting, strategy and operations. It's a lot of travel, a lot of late nights," he nodded slowly. "That why you were out here?" "I was supposed to visit a friend, but I ended up needing space more than company." "Space can do that," he said. "Helps you hear your own thoughts again." Mabel turned toward him. "What about you?" "What do you do when you're not rescuing stranded women?" He chuckled. "I manage land for a few folks, harvest timber in the winter, maintain the trails. I help out at the ranger station during fire season, pays enough to keep the lights on." She studied him. "You like it?" "I do. It's honest work. I'm outside. Gets my hands dirty, but my head stays clear." She looked down at her hands. "I don't think I've had a clear head in years." He didn't ask more. He just nodded, and they stood in silence, the kind that didn't demand to be filled. By late afternoon, the roads had dried enough for Sawyer to drive her down to the nearest garage in his neighbor's old truck. Rosie stayed behind with the neighbor's teenage daughter, leaving them alone for the first time. The ride was quiet at first, the tires crunching over gravel. Mabel stared out the window as the trees thinned. "I haven't driven on a road without billboards in years," she said suddenly. "Must be quieter in your head out here." "Maybe that's what scared me." He glanced at her, brow furrowed. "What do you mean?" "I've spent so long building things, my career, my image, my life, that I forgot how to just be in it." "You don't strike me as someone who forgets much." She smiled faintly. "That's the thing with people like me, we remember everything. We just don't let ourselves feel it." The mechanic wasn't able to fix her car that day. Parts had to be ordered. At least 2 more days. Mabel didn't even pretend to be upset. Back at the cabin, she pitched in without being asked, chopping vegetables for dinner, sweeping the floor, helping Rosie braid her hair before bed. By evening, something had shifted. Not in words, but in presence. The way she lingered in the doorway while Sawyer read Rosie a story. The way her eyes softened when she watched him make tea. She didn't look like a guest anymore. The next morning, she was in the yard, kneeling in the dirt as Rosie showed her how to plant daffodil bulbs. "My mom says they come up in spring," Rosie said proudly. "They will," Mabel replied, brushing soil from her hands. "They'll surprise you when you've forgotten what you planted." Sawyer watched from the porch, arms crossed. She looked nothing like the woman who'd climbed into his truck soaked and shivering. Her sleeves were pushed up, her cheeks flushed from exertion. She laughed more easily now. She looked like she belonged in the picture Rosie had drawn. That night, after Rosie fell asleep, Mabel lingered by the fire, her knees tucked under her. Sawyer handed her a cup of tea and sat across from her. "I've been meaning to ask," he said slowly. "What happens to your consulting while you're gone?" She hesitated. "I have people handling it." He tilted his head. "You're not just a consultant, are you?" She met his gaze. "No," a beat past. "I'm the CEO of Zane Tech." There was no flicker of recognition, no shock, just quiet processing. "I should have guessed," he said finally. "You carry yourself like someone used to being in charge. You're not surprised. I don't care what title's on your business card. You're the woman who sat in my kitchen and made pancakes with my daughter." Her throat tightened. "Most people look at me differently when they find out." "I'm not most people." She set her mug down. "I didn't lie. I just didn't know how to tell you. I liked being nobody here." "You weren't nobody," he said softly. "You were just you." She stood, crossed the room, and sat beside him, close enough for her thigh to brush his. "I don't have many places where I can be just me." "You have one now," her breath caught. "I don't want to leave." His hand found hers, calloused fingers curling around her palm. "Then don't." She leaned in, and his lips met hers, slow, certain, and full of the promise of something neither of them had dared name until now. When she pulled back, her voice trembled with something deeper than fear. "What if this doesn't make sense in the real world? Then maybe we make our own real." And for the first time in a long time, she believed they could. The cabin was quieter that morning, not because of silence, but because of something steadier. A rhythm had begun to form. Mabel stood barefoot in the small kitchen, carefully pouring batter into the hot skillet while Sawyer repaired a loose cabinet hinge near the back door. Rosie sat on the floor, surrounded by markers and a half-finished cardboard crown. You're pouring too slow, Rosie said, watching the batter drizzle. Daddy does it faster. Mabel raised an eyebrow without turning. And yet his pancakes come out shaped like Australia. Sawyer looked up from the screwdriver in his hand. That's intentional, geography lesson. That's what you're going with, Mabel asked, flipping the pancake. Absolutely, Sawyer said. You're welcome, Rosie. Next up, the Appalachian Mountains in bacon strips. Rosie squealed with laughter, knocking over her glitter glue in the process. Mabel handed Sawyer a damp rag and then returned to the stove without missing a beat. He didn't say thank you. He didn't need to. The ease between them had grown without effort, like moss over stone. It wasn't about grand gestures anymore, it was about glances, timing, the way their movements filled in around each other like a well-rehearsed dance. Later that afternoon, Sawyer brought out the old truck to haul firewood from behind the shed, and Mabel followed him without being asked. The air had lost the bite of the storm, replaced by a mild breeze that carried the scent of cedar and sun-warmed bark. She picked up a split log and studied it. So this is the glamorous side of rural living. He stacked his own piece onto the wagon. That's right, firewood, muddy boots, and the occasional raccoon standoff. I'm intrigued. You wouldn't last a week, he teased. I've lasted 3 days. He gave her a look. You really think this is the same thing? Why wouldn't it be? Because this isn't your world, Mabel. That stopped her. She rested a hand on the edge of the wagon. You think I don't notice that? I think you've been trying to forget it. She watched him for a second, then nodded slowly. You're right. He pulled off his gloves. I wasn't trying to pick a fight. I know, she said. I'm just tired of being someone I don't even recognize anymore. Sawyer leaned against the truck, arms folded. You're not what I expected. Oh, I figured someone like you, powerful, used to control, would have walked out of here the second you found a signal. I thought about it. He tilted his head. But she met his gaze. You made it hard to leave. They didn't speak again as they finished loading the wagon. When they rolled it back toward the cabin, neither of them said what they were thinking, that the line between obligation and choice had blurred days ago. That evening, Mabel stood at the edge of the porch, watching the sun set behind the trees. The golden light spilled like syrup across the clearing, igniting everything it touched. Her phone buzzed in her back pocket. A weak signal had finally clawed its way through. She didn't reach for it. Sawyer came up beside her, holding 2 mismatched mugs. He handed one to her. She didn't take her eyes off the horizon. It's going to come apart soon, isn't it? He didn't pretend not to understand. Probably. I should have told you the first night. You didn't owe me anything. I owe you everything, she said. He let that sit between them. Then, what happens when you go back? I take 60 meetings a week, negotiate with people who don't look me in the eye, and sign contracts that make other people rich. Sounds lonely. It is. He looked at her the way someone studies something they know they're going to lose. You could change it. I thought I couldn't, she said, gripping the mug tighter. But now I wonder if I just didn't want to try. He didn't answer. He just reached for her hand, his fingers brushing hers with a kind of gentle finality. She didn't pull away. The next morning, the mechanic called. The parts had arrived. Her car would be ready by noon. She relayed the message over coffee, her voice flat. Rosie looked up from her cereal. You're leaving? Mabel nodded slowly. I have to. Sawyer didn't say anything. Rosie set her spoon down. But I like you. I like you too, Rosie. So much. Then why can't you stay? Sawyer stood and reached for his keys. Come on, Rosie, let's let Mabel pack. Mabel knelt to hug the little girl. I'll write to you, okay? You can send me drawings. Will you come back? I don't know yet. Rosie blinked at her, then turned and followed her father without another word. The cabin felt smaller when they were gone. Too quiet. Mabel folded the borrowed clothes, left them neatly on the bed, then gathered her things. Before stepping out the door, she looked around once more. She didn't take a photo. She didn't write a note. She simply memorized it. At the garage, Sawyer stood beside the car, arms crossed. Rosie clutched a stuffed bear to her chest. It's all set, the mechanic said, handing Mabel the keys. She nodded, her gaze flicking to Sawyer. Thank you for everything. He didn't move. You don't need to say that. I do. He looked at her, and his voice was quieter than she'd ever heard it. You're not the only one who forgot how to feel things, Mabel. She stepped closer. Then tell me, he shook his head. I can't hold you here, that wouldn't be fair. What if I don't want fair? He leaned in, pressed a kiss to her forehead, and stepped back. Then you'll come back when you're ready. Rosie handed her the bear. He's for long drives. Mabel took it, throat aching. I'll take good care of him. She drove away without looking back, not because she didn't want to, but because if she did, she might never leave. The city swallowed her again like it always did, fast, loud, unforgiving. Her office felt colder now. The glass walls reflected a woman she barely recognized. She walked into a meeting 15 minutes late, wearing jeans instead of a suit. Her assistant blinked in confusion. Should I cancel the next one? No, Mabel said. Just give me a second. She sat at the head of the table and looked at the faces around her. Lawyers, board members, advisors, all waiting for her to speak. I want to restructure the executive tiers, she said. Too much bureaucracy, too little innovation. I want to cut redundancy and bring in people who actually understand the product and set up a foundation. For single parents who work 2 jobs and still can't afford a babysitter. A murmur rippled across the room. Her CFO leaned forward. That's a significant shift. I know, Mabel said. It's time. She walked out of the meeting 20 minutes later, stepped into her private elevator, and pressed the button for the rooftop. The wind hit her as soon as the doors opened. The skyline glittered around her like a crown made of steel. She pulled out her phone and stared at the screen. No message, no missed calls. She didn't expect any, but she typed a name anyway, not to send a text, just to see it written, Sawyer Nelson. And for the first time in years, her heart beat for something that wasn't strategy or power or legacy. It beat for a man who fixed broken cabinets, made pancakes shaped like continents, and never once asked for anything in return. It beat for a little girl who handed her a crayon drawing and trusted her with a bear. And it beat for the version of herself she found in a storm. 3 weeks passed. The city didn't wait. It never did. Schedules tightened around Mabel like a vice, meetings stacked on top of each other until the days blurred, and her inbox multiplied like an invasive species. She showed up, efficient and composed, but the silence after each meeting lingered longer than it used to. Her heels clicked across marble floors, but they didn't feel like power anymore, just noise. She hadn't returned to Ridge Creek, not yet, but she hadn't stopped thinking about it either. She kept the bear Rosie gave her on the corner of her desk, tucked beside a framed photo of nothing, just an empty silver frame she never got around to filling. The bear remained untouched, and her assistant never asked about it. But Mabel caught her glancing at it once, curious, and she simply said, "He's not for decoration." The board approved the foundation. She funded it privately, under a different name, and structured it so the recipients never had to know who she was. She didn't want credit. She just wanted it to exist, but none of it made the ache go away. One Thursday morning, she walked into her office to find a hand-delivered envelope on her chair. No label, no stamp. Inside was a single sheet of paper. Your company installed a new weather tower 2 miles outside Ridge Creek. It's blocking the migration path of the local elk herd. The ranger station has tried contacting Zane Tech's infrastructure team twice. No response. She read it 3 times. There was no name, but she didn't need one by that afternoon. She was on the road. The drive felt longer this time. Not because of traffic, but because everything ahead of her felt uncertain. The first time she hadn't known what she was walking into. Now she did. Now, every mile closer made her chest tighter. She didn't tell anyone she was leaving. She turned off her phone halfway through the drive. When she pulled into Ridge Creek, the sun was low, casting gold across the trees. The roads were dry, the sky clear. No storms, no excuses. She drove past the ranger station first. It was locked up for the evening. A sign on the door read, "Back tomorrow." Elk first, paperwork later. She smiled despite herself. The cabin looked the same. The porch light was on. She parked and sat with her hands on the wheel for a minute, watching the movement through the kitchen window. Rosie twirled in a circle, her hair flying as Sawyer reached for something on a high shelf. Their world hadn't paused without her. It had kept moving. That realization was both a relief and a weight. She got out and walked up the steps. Sawyer opened the door before she could knock. He leaned against the frame, arms loose at his sides, eyes unreadable. She didn't speak, neither did he. Then Rosie's voice rang out behind him. "She's here." Sawyer stepped aside just as Rosie barreled forward and wrapped her arms around Mabel's waist. Mabel bent down, holding her tightly. "You didn't write me," Rosie said into her shirt. "I know," Mabel whispered. "I didn't know what to say. You could have said hi." Mabel pulled back. "Hi," Sawyer's voice was quieter. "You came back. I got a letter. I figured that would get your attention. I didn't know you knew about the tower. I didn't until the elk stopped showing up." She stepped inside, her eyes adjusting to the familiar warmth. "Why didn't you just call? I figured if you still cared, you'd show up." She turned to him. "I never stopped caring." He nodded once and said nothing. Rosie tugged on her sleeve. "Do you want to stay for dinner?" Mabel looked at Sawyer. He didn't answer. He just moved toward the stove and picked up a second plate from the cabinet as if she'd never been gone. They ate quietly. The tension didn't disappear, but it softened around the edges. Rosie told her about a frog she'd found behind the shed and how she named it Clarence. Mabel asked if Clarence was still around. He hopped away. "Daddy says he's probably on an adventure. I think he got bored." After Rosie went to bed, Mabel sat on the porch swing while Sawyer cleaned up. The air was cooler than she remembered. She wrapped her arms around herself, listening to the sounds of crickets and the occasional owl. When he joined her, he didn't sit. He leaned against the post, his hands in his pockets. "I didn't know what to expect," he said. "I didn't know what to say." He looked at her. "Try anyway. I've been living a life that looks good on paper and feels like nothing in person. I didn't realize how hollow it was until I left it. You could have told me that before you left. I was scared." "Of what?" "That if I stayed, I wouldn't be able to walk away again." He stepped closer. "Maybe you weren't supposed to." She stood. "I don't want to walk away again." He studied her face. "Are you saying that because of the storm or because of what came after? Because of everything? You, Rosie, the way I felt when I was here, the way I feel now." He didn't move for a long moment, then he reached for her hand. "You changed something in her," he said. "Rosie, she wasn't herself after you left. She didn't throw a tantrum or cry. She just got quiet, like she was waiting for something that didn't come." Mabel's voice was barely a whisper. "I'm sorry. I'm not telling you to make you feel bad. I'm telling you because she matters, and so do you. But if you come back, it has to be all in, no halfway, no disappearing." "I'm not going anywhere," he nodded once. "Then come inside." She followed him. That night, she didn't sleep on the couch. She didn't pack a bag. She didn't check her phone. She stayed. The next morning, she called her assistant and dictated a press release. Effective immediately, Mabel Zane would be stepping down as CEO. She would remain on the board, overseeing the foundation she'd created, but the day-to-day would go to someone else. Someone who wanted the job more than the title. Her assistant asked if she was sure. Mabel said yes. When she hung up, she walked into the kitchen and found Sawyer making breakfast. Rosie sat at the table, humming to herself as she colored the inside of a cereal box. Mabel sat beside her and picked up a crayon. "What are you drawing?" she asked. "A house with a garden and a goat. Daddy says we have room." Mabel smiled. "Can I help?" Rosie nodded and handed her the greens. Sawyer looked over his shoulder. "You know anything about goats?" "No," Mabel said, glancing up. "But I learn fast." He walked over, leaned down, and kissed her once, slow and certain. She reached for his hand without breaking eye contact. Rosie didn't look up, but a moment later she added a third figure to the drawing. One with long hair and a red dress. No crowns, no towers, just a garden, a goat, and three people who hadn't planned on each other but found home anyway. The last of the autumn leaves drifted down from the sugar maples, carpeting the edge of the woods behind the cabin in a rust-colored quilt. Mabel stood in the garden Sawyer had helped her dig 2 weeks ago, dirt smudging her cheek, pruning shears in hand. A row of late-season kale stood proud beside the cold, hardened carrots. She brushed her hair out of her face with the back of her wrist and looked up at the sound of approaching footsteps. "You're doing that thing again," Sawyer said, stepping onto the path in his worn boots. "What thing?" He nodded toward the row of herbs she'd planted too close together. "You're overthinking the spacing. I like symmetry. Plants don't." She laughed under her breath and straightened. "You're lucky I love you, or I'd throw this rosemary at your head." He stepped closer, brushing a speck of soil from her jaw. "And you're lucky I love you, or I'd be pointing out you're wearing my flannel backwards again." She looked down. "Damn it." I think it's a statement now. I'm reclaiming rural fashion. Sawyer's hand lingered on her jaw. You look like you belong here. I feel like I do, she said softly. He didn't say anything else. He didn't need to. They walked back to the cabin together, past the freshly built chicken coop and the little wooden fence Rosie had helped paint. Inside, the fire in the stove had mellowed to a low crackle. Rosie sat cross-legged on the floor, surrounded by construction paper and yarn, a glue stick clutched in one hand. What are you making? Mabel asked, crouching beside her, a scarecrow, but for the hallway. Isn't that where people walk? Exactly. He'll scare away people who don't wash their hands. Mabel stifled a laugh. Excellent, carry on. The last month had passed like a dream, but unlike every other dream she'd chased before, this one didn't dissolve when she woke up. She didn't miss the boardroom. She didn't miss the skyline. Her old world had shrunk behind her, and this strange, messy, grounding new life had expanded in its place. But there was one thing she hadn't done yet. One thing she'd been waiting for, not out of fear, but out of wanting it to be right. That night, after Rosie had gone to bed and the house had gone quiet, Mabel sat on the front steps under the stars with Sawyer beside her. The air was crisp, the kind that hinted at the first frost, and the scent of pine drifted through the clearing. Sawyer, she said, picking at a loose thread on her sleeve, do you ever wish things had turned out different? He didn't answer right away. He leaned forward, elbows resting on his knees. I used to. And now he looked at her. Now I think everything led me here. She turned to face him. Even the hard things, especially the hard things, she nodded slowly. Sometimes I catch myself waiting for this to fall apart, like I'm not supposed to have this much peace. He reached over and took her hand. You're not borrowing this life, Mabel. It's yours. She looked at him, really looked at him, this man who had built a world with his hands, who had welcomed her without ever asking her to change, who had made space for her in every corner of his life. I want to build a greenhouse, she said suddenly. Next spring, for Rosie and maybe. For a few things I haven't tried growing yet, he smiled. We can do that. And I want to stay, she added, voice trembling only slightly. Not just for now, not until the next thing. I want to stay and build something that doesn't end. He stood, pulling her up with him. You already are, she took a breath. There's something else. He tilted his head, waiting. She reached into her pocket and pulled out a small velvet box. I know it's supposed to go a certain way, but I'm not great at rules or waiting. Sawyer stared at her, his expression unreadable. She opened the box. Inside was a simple silver ring. No diamonds, no engravings, just a band, smooth and strong. I love you, she said, her voice quiet but unwavering. And I want to be yours, and for you to be mine, will you marry me? He didn't speak for a moment. Then he reached out, closed the box gently, and held her face in both hands. You stole my thunder, he murmured. She blinked. What? I've had a ring in my toolbox for 2 weeks, her breath caught. I was waiting until you stopped planting things out of order. She laughed, tears slipping down her cheeks. Are you saying yes? I'm saying hell yes. He pulled her into his arms, lifting her off her feet as he kissed her, slow and deep. The kind of kiss that said they'd already survived the hardest part, finding each other. A week later, they stood in the clearing behind the cabin. No tuxes, no aisle. Just Rosie holding a bouquet of wildflowers, and the two of them, barefoot in the grass. Exchanging vows they wrote that morning on the back of a feed catalog. Mabel wore a dress she'd found in a second-hand shop in town, soft and cream-colored, with sleeves that fell off her shoulders. Sawyer wore a white shirt rolled to the elbows and suspenders that made Rosie giggle. They married under the maple tree, the same one that had dropped its leaves on the day she returned. The same one that now stood witness to a life rebuilt from the ground up. When the sun dipped low and the stars began to show, they danced on the porch, Rosie standing on Sawyer's shoes as he swayed with her. Mabel leaned against the railing, watching them, her heart so full it ached. Later that night, after Rosie had fallen asleep in a nest of blankets and leftover cake crumbs, Mabel sat beside Sawyer on the porch swing, her head on his shoulder. I used to think love was a transaction, she said quietly. Something strategic, predictable. And now, she looked up at him. Now I know it's the best kind of gamble. He brushed her hair back from her face. You didn't just gamble, you bet everything. It would have been worth it even if I lost. But you didn't. No, she whispered. I didn't. They stayed there for a long time, the night wrapping around them like a promise, and when they finally went inside, they did so hand in hand, into a house that no longer felt borrowed, into a life that no longer felt temporary, into a forever they had chosen together. The greenhouse came in spring. It was small, tucked beside the edge of the garden, with glass-paned Sawyer salvaged from an old barn and a weathered wooden door Rosie painted light blue. Inside, Mabel grew tomatoes, lavender, and a lemon tree that never quite bore fruit but kept trying anyway. Every morning she opened the door, stepped inside, and breathed in the scent of soil and sun-warmed leaves. She had grown cities, empires, legacies, but this little life, this love, this home was the richest thing she had ever planted, and it bloomed, every day. In quiet, extraordinary ways.